Alan Cattell with Palisade Radio, and today we're continuing our La Estancia series in Cafayate, Argentina. Last week we spoke with Doug Casey, and sitting down with us today is best-selling author and financial analyst John Mauldin. John, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
It's good to be here, Colin. I've enjoyed the week with you.
This past week you participated in the Casey Conference in Cafayate, and you outlined some general themes that you foresee moving through 2014 and into 2015. Please share those thoughts with our listeners.
Well, let's go a little bit further out than that. I think we're getting ready to see the curve in the road, if you will, the change that's going to be an accelerating change. It will become an elbow that looks hyperbolic when we look back on it 20, 30 years from now, of technology and accelerating transformation with the end of the road. And that's when we run to the end of the ability of governments to finance their promises. And those two forces are at odds with each other. They're competing with each other. They both have strong possibilities for profit, and they both can be very detrimental if you're on the wrong side of the curve.
On many occasions, you've discussed the possibility for a series of bubbles that are set to pop in the next few years. With that being said, do you foresee a paradigm shift in global finance occurring?
I don't know if you could call it a paradigm shift. We are going to come to the end of the ability of the developed market to finance its debt, the sovereign debt, at reasonable rates without monetization. So Japan, for instance, has elected to monetize. That's, you can call it what you will, but that's the first true era of Abenomics. Now it has to be done with reform, which he's trying to do, and it has to be done with balanced budgets and all of that stuff. But it's the only way they can get out of it. But by and large, they have to monetize close on to 150% of their GDP. Be like the United States saying, we're going to print $25 billion worth of paper. $25 trillion worth of paper. Well, that might affect the currency somewhat. And that's what they're going to do. Europe has got to come to its moment before it decides to monetize its debt or to pull the euro apart. If you ask me, and everybody else here at Estancia would disagree with me, because nearly everybody here thinks the euro will blow up and won't exist. I think the probability, though it's not a large one, is that the euro will exist, but it's going to be with enormous costs to especially Germany. The problem that Germany has is that breaking up the euro has enormous costs, so they just have to decide what they want to do. I think the French are the key. The French are going to have to learn to either subsume their nationalistic tendencies and their sovereign ability to determine their debt and run deficits, or they're going to have to pull out of the euro. There's not much choice. And that's probably going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months. Maybe they can push it to 24. But this isn't, if you're asking 2014, 2015, this is something that it's going to start coming up in the markets. And one thing we know about bond markets, everything is just absolutely hunky-dory. It's fine. There is no problem until it isn't. We hit the bang moment. That moment when people go, oh my God, they may not be able to pay, and interest rates go through the roof. I mean, look at Greece, even 3 months before its interest rates took off. Everybody said, oh, it's a sovereign country, of course it can't default. Well, if you looked at the mathematics, it had to default. In the same way, if you look at the mathematics of what Japan has to do, they're going to default in the sense that they're going to monetize the debt. So they're going to give you paper, and that paper is going to buy you lots of cool stuff in Japan, but it's going to buy you, at the end of the day, I believe, at least half of what it would have bought you on the international markets. They're going to just, if you're a retired person in Japan, I think the technical term for your situation is that you're screwed. But that's their best choice, really. Otherwise, they go into deflationary collapse. The time for Japan to have made good choices was, 10, 15 years ago. They made a lot of bad choices, and now they have a choice between disaster A and disaster B. That's exactly what happened to Greece. The Italians and the Spanish were faced with not being able to fund their debt, or to agreeing to what everybody now disdainfully calls austerity, but it's actually just trying to figure out how to balance your budget, how to make your income equal to your outgo. Something that every family has to try to figure out every year. Well, politicians don't like to do that because it is painful, and it does, no question about it, reduce growth and GDP in the short term for a country. And politicians are all about short-term pain and short-term and short-term pleasure. And short-term pain is not what they want to have. They want to have la dolce vita. I'm not certain what the Spanish equivalent of that is, but they want to just do it just one more election round. It didn't happen. They had to go through the painful part of austerity. You now have almost a winning coalition in Italy willing to walk away from the euro. The euro without Italy does not exist. You can arguably get away with Spain, but Spain is desperately wanting to stay in the euro. All the other countries are peripheral, except for Italy, France, and Germany. Those countries have to be there for the euro to truly exist in its form today. You probably have 40% of the French willing to vote for Marine Le Pen, who is, dear God, a nationalist socialist. And you'd think the Europeans would have figured out in the 30s this really doesn't work. But it looks like they could easily take 40% of the vote. You start telling the French they've got to balance their budgets, they've got to have austerity, they've got to listen to the Germans. Who knows what they'll do? I don't. And that's the problem of making predictions these days, is that it's no longer about, or just about, value, or can this company earn X amount of money, and what is its market, and is this management any good, and all the normal details. It's about what the hell are politicians going to do, and what will the voters do, and what will the politicians do when the voters tell them to do something that is really pretty stupid. It's a very, very dicey time for investors in general.
Sticking with Japan, a topic that you've been quite vocal on, how can listeners profit off the situation or speculate on an implosion in the Japanese bond market?
I actually think you can short the yen. And if you want to get cute, you can go long gold in terms of yen. So you go long gold and short yen. And so your gold is in yen terms, and I think you'll do quite fine. In fact, I think, and probably a lot of your listeners don't want to hear this, but I think gold in terms of yen will do far, far better than gold in terms of dollar. The United States could screw it up. It's very possible. But I think in the catalog of countries that could get it wrong, the United States is surprisingly and pleasantly, from my standpoint, since I live there, at the end. We have a very pleasant set of circumstances, no fault of our own genius. We found massive amounts of energy in the form of shale gas and tight oil. And in another, 7, 8, 10 years, we're going to be energy sufficient. Well, that is actually going to, especially if we start exporting natural gas, which we should, change our trade balance. And we could look up by the middle of the next decade and have a positive trade balance. If the world's reserve currency, which the world trades in, suddenly starts seeing a shortage of those supplies of dollar for trade, while world trade will be growing, even if it's a reduced trade, if we don't see the growth in the terms that we've seen it before, the demand for the dollar could get quite high. And we could see the dollar, contrary to what everybody wants to talk about, you can see the dollar rise in value. Now, can politicians screw it up? Absolutely. I have every faith in the Republican Party to be able to nominate an idiot that cannot win, and that we don't carry somebody and get enough votes and we lose again. We've demonstrated our ability to and I say our because I'm nominally a Republican, though probably on the libertarian far side of it. But that the party has demonstrated its ability to shoot itself in the foot, reload the gun, and shoot again. That being said, if the group, if we can learn our lessons, I think that the fallout from Obamacare, which is going to be negative, I think it has the potential to be massively negative, could move 3 to 4% of the voters, which is all that's really needed. And we could see what would be called a landslide, but it wouldn't be. But it would be enough to be able to change the direction. I remember the dire predictions, and you're way too young to remember this, Colin, that were in the late 80s and 90s. I mean, Ravi, whatever, he was writing a book about the collapse of the dollar and the collapse of everything in the late 80s, because we could look at Ross Perot's charts and know that it was all going to come down around our ears. And then you had, of all things, dear God, Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, two of the most unlikely characters in history, sit down on a kitchen table and come to an agreement about how to move forward. And within 4 years, we had a balanced budget. And in 2002, 2003, there were serious economic papers being written about what do we do when we run out of federal government treasury debt? Because, quite frankly, a significant part of the financial structure depends on being able to buy short-term treasuries to fund temporary projects and so forth. I mean, to the tune of trillions of dollars. And we were looking at the very real potential, if we'd kept on that path, if the Republicans and the Bush administration had not screwed it up when they got in power, that we were looking at the very real potential of paying the debt down. It would have come to the 2008 crisis, and it would have been less of a crisis. And if we'd have borrowed $1 trillion or $2 trillion or $3 trillion, nobody would have cared. Well, now we're backed ourselves into a corner again. And I'm hopeful that we can do the right thing. I mean, it's the Winston Churchill line is that you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. Well, right now we're trying a lot of different weird things and they're not working. So maybe we'll try the right thing this next time. If we don't, then, God help us all, I don't know what. All that being said, I buy a little gold every month. It's a small percentage of my portfolio, and I don't see it as an investment. I see it as insurance. It's central bank insurance. Because at the end of the day, I really don't truly trust the bastards. And so I want to have a little bit of insurance, just like I've got health insurance, I've got life insurance. I never want to use either. I especially don't want to use my life insurance. That would be a bad outcome. And if I ever have to sell my gold, that's probably not a good day at the office either.
Can you let our listeners know what you're working on these days? Your last book, Endgame, reached the New York Times bestsellers list. Congratulations on that. What's coming next?
Well, I had Code Red come out about 6 months ago, and that made the Wall Street Journal's bestseller list and some other bestseller lists. I'm actually working on a somewhat more optimistic book that we'll call The Age of Transformation, about what the world's going to look like in 20 years. And it has positive aspects to it and some negative aspects to it. Change is always difficult. I mean, the McCormick Reaper and other threshing machines displaced 30% of American workers from 1870 to 1900. We went from being where the agricultural worker was the number one job to where the number one job in 1900 was personal servant. I mean, it was a complete paradigm shift. And the people that were in the way of that change had to figure out something else to do, literally to eat. They weren't very happy about that change. The people that adapted did very, very well. Humanity if you look at it from a global sense, we're in a golden age. We're in the best period of time the world has ever been in. There's less poverty, less hunger. People are living longer than they've ever lived before. There's more global trade. There's more this. I mean, it's an era that Thomas Hobbes, who said that life was short, brutal, nasty, and mean, would look on, 350 years later and go, oh my God, what abundance you have. What an incredible world you built. This is miraculous. So, we look at individual places. We look at income inequality. We look at disparity. We look at all of the bumps in the road. But the reality is, from the long-term stream of things, the human experiment's working pretty well. And I think it's going to work in the future even better. We're going to see accelerating change. We're going to see massive improvements in healthcare and biotech. I think we're going to solve some of the major killers of our time, which of course is going to mean that Social Security is even worse than we think it is. There's always a cloud around every silver lining. But in general, I'm pretty optimistic about the future as long as we can get governments out of the way.
John, on that note, I would urge all of our readers to visit MauldinEconomics.com and pick up your latest book, Code Red. Thanks so much and hope to have you back on the program soon.
I'll be here. Look forward to the next time we're together, Colin.